people like yourself can always come back and enjoy what there is to be found at the national parks and learn and recreate on those kind of things. And I need your help to do that. So when Mrs. Darcy was asking you not to touch stuff and be careful about things like that, that was a really important feature to help protect us and the park. So today I want to talk to you about some of the stuff that you were raising your hands this morning about all the stuff you've been learning about the rivers and the waterways in the Commonwealth, and the American Indian and their culture and society and how they've been living here for such a long time, and the first Europeans that arrived when? 1607, and the culture and the society that they bring with them that is influencing each other with the American Indian cultures, in part because of a relationship between a European man named Captain John Smith and an American Indian girl named Pocahontas, exactly, and her father, who is Chief Powhatan, exactly, and her husband, who is
Captain John Smith.
her husband.
Oh, John Rolfe.
John Rolfe. Yeah, you were right at it, buddy. I know it's kind of a weird last name, so you're okay. Yeah, John Rolfe, exactly. So all these folks have connections to Fort Monroe one way or another. Okay? And what I want to talk to you about is involving a lot of these things, but leads into it with this question. If you're going to talk about the relationship, I know I didn't mean to go grammar on you, but two words and their meanings and how they relate to each other. If they mean the same thing, what do you call that? A synonym. What if they mean the opposite? Antonym, exactly. So, let me ask you this. Where do you guys live? Hampton. Where is Hampton?
Virginia.
In Virginia. Where is Virginia?
The
United States, exactly. The United States is the home of the brave and the land of the free, right? It's the land of the free, exactly. So, which means that everybody who's living in the United States are free. That means you and I all have rights, freedom, right? We all have freedom, right? Your teachers have freedom, I have freedom, we all have freedom, right? Which means you get to decide who you're going to be when you grow up, what you're going to do, the job you're going to have, where you're going to live, who you're going to love, all that stuff, because we have freedom, right? So I'm talking about freedom and slavery today and how they connect to things, and it involves Pocahontas' husband. Remember who he is again? John Rolfe, exactly. John Rolfe, because he couldn't get a cell signal and the internet was down, he had to write a letter back to England. Okay? And in 1619, he states that a ship flying a Dutch flag called the White Lion arrives at Old Point Comfort in August with cargo looking to trade in the manner of 20 and odd Africans. Okay? Now, don't worry about the odd part, it's just meaning about 20. And where do those Africans come from? Okay, Angola, which is in Africa. Exactly. Some of these are sort of easy ones. But yeah, they come from Africa. And in Africa, were they free doing whatever they wanted to do pretty much? You don't think?
Yeah.
Maybe. It's a fair question. I don't know the individual histories of these specific Africans that we're talking about. So they might have been enslaved already, but I like to think that they were probably free, like the American Indian and the European guys were doing whatever they wanted. And after a series of events and situations, at some point they found themselves to be enslaved. And as you're right, forced to get on board a ship and then go across the ocean all the way to the New World, to land, as you see in this painting here in the New World. But what I want you to think about is this, is in that situation, in that happening, and becoming enslaved and being forced on that ship and coming over and to land on the beach as you see here, what kind of emotions do you think they were feeling?
Scared.
Scared? Sad? Confused? Bad? Yeah? Any others you guys thinking? One more? Strange? Sure. Stress. They could be feeling all these things. A part of me wonders they might be slightly happy too, because they're on dry land again, right? Because they've been in a ship for so long, maybe. They're probably confused, sad, mad, scared. All those things, probably all at the same time. Can you imagine having all of those emotions all happening at the same time? That's a pretty amazing thought, isn't it? They probably is what happened. Did they bring anything with them?
No.
No? What about this? What about their language? Did they bring their language?
Yes.
All right. What about their culture? Did they bring their culture? Yeah. So they did bring some things with them. And in fact, those are really valuable things because they start influencing the culture that was here. The mixture of the European and the American Indian cultures. Now you have a mixture of African culture as well. And today, the United States is known as a melting pot of cultures and languages and peoples. And this is some of those early beginnings of that. So that's a really significant thing about the arrival of these African peoples for the first time in the European and American Indian colonies and things we're seeing here. But what perhaps might be more significant, though, is what that would also mean in terms of other things. And so in this painting, right, these Africans are in fact enslaved, but do they know what tomorrow is going to bring? Do they know what's going to happen next?
No.
They don't know. They really don't. But you and I can look back through the use of primary sources and documents and other things to know a little bit about what did happen. Right? Now you and I kind of have an idea about what our future is. We know what we're going to do tomorrow. They don't. So we look back and we know that this day is not the day that slavery begins in each home. Now it could have because they're enslaved. So that could mean when they arrive, slavery begins. Or it could have meant that because there is no legal slavery here in the English colony, that they would become free. Either could have happened. But we know that this is not the day that slavery begins. It takes time. In fact, it takes about 30 years for slavery to evolve and become something legal in the colony and what would become the United States. 1655 actually is when that happens. So what does happen? What is their future? What would happen next? To understand that, we have to think about how a lot of other Europeans would come into this world. Okay, a lot of Europeans were coming and they didn't have the way to pay for that transportation. So they sign a contract and agree to be a servant for somebody else for 5 to 7 years and do whatever they say and to give them a place to stay, be fed, be clothed, and at the end of the time be set free to do as they like anybody else. What we understand and believe is true is that these early Africans that are arriving, starting in 1619, were treated like any other European arriving that had not paid for their own transportation and way over, and being treated as an indentured servant. An indentured servant is not really free and is not really enslaved. It's something in between those two. And that's really what we think these first Africans are being treated. And we know that from individual histories of specific people that are arriving from Africa a little bit later and what happens to them. So, over time, as we mentioned, it takes time to evolve. In 1655, slavery is legal, but it continues to evolve and change. And when we read our history lessons and we see movies and we read stories, it all goes to confirm what we said before when we were talking about freedom and slavery and their relationship, right? Slavery is always bad, right? It is. It's bad because you are not free. If for no other reason, you're not free, so it's obviously bad. But what happens? What's the other part of the story? Where does it end? Because you know, you and I today are all free. Everyone in the United States is free. So how do we get to there from here? So that's going to involve a little 5th grade stuff here. Okay, so don't tell your teachers we talk about this. It's just between you and me. All right? Shh. Shh. Cone of silence. All right? So we're talking about the American Civil War, 1860s. Okay? It's a struggle between Americans over the question of whether the United States as one country would be split into two. Whether the United States, now being solely focused around the northern states of the United States, would want to end slavery to keep together the country as one, or whether the southern states who want slavery to remain legal would break apart and form their own country called the Confederate States of America. Okay? And that's really the question, over the question of slavery. And into that scene I want to talk about 4 men, 3 of which are here: Frank Baker, James Townsend, and Shepard Mallory. Right? Like you, these 3 men live here in Hampton. But unlike you, who had freedom, these 3 men did not. They had no choice but to be sent where they were told. And in this story, they're being sent to go build gun emplacements for the Confederacy to fire cannons at Fort Monroe. Okay? What they don't know is that Major General Benjamin Butler, who is now the base commander of Fort Monroe, a United States fort, a northern fort, has been sent here. And his number one order is to prevent and not allow the Confederate states and the Confederate forces to build gun emplacements to fire at Fort Monroe. That's his number one order. And remember, what were Frank Baker, James Townsend, and Shepard Mallory being sent to do? They've been sent to do just that. They've been sent to build gun emplacements to fire at the fort. Something that Benjamin Butler is not supposed to let people do. Not a good situation, is it? In the middle of the night, on May 23rd, 1861, Frank Baker, James Townsend, and Shepard Mallory steal themselves away in a small rowboat and row over 3 miles across the Hampton Roads waterway, likely guided by the lighthouse here and giving them direction of where to go, coming towards Fort Monroe, the United States fort here, and the troops here. And they're looking to ask for protection and freedom. Fortunately for you and I, they make it safely to the fort, and they get an opportunity to speak to Ben Butler. He hears their story, he hears about where they've been and what they've been doing and what they have seen and what they've been feeling and where they are in life and all of these things. And he hears their request. And what are they asking for?
Freedom.
Right, protection and freedom, exactly. And he makes a very amazing decision. His decision is largely based around what they have been doing. Remember his number one order? Not to let people build gun batteries to fire at the fort? Well, because that's what they had been sent to do, and because the folks in Virginia had claimed to no longer be a part of the United States, and they're using their labor against the United States, he's going to keep them and offer them protection. A great way to explain that is this. If you're arguing and fighting with somebody and they are hitting you with a stick, if you get the stick away, are you going to give the stick back?
No.
No, of course not, right? That would be silly. In that analogy, these three men, Baker, Townsend, and Mallory, would be the stick, right? They're the ones doing the labor to fire at the fort. So it would be silly for the general to give the three men back to continue building gun emplacements, wouldn't it? So he offers them protection and he keeps them. And he says that hopefully when the law changes at the end of the war, we'll be able to be free. And by the next day, 9 show up, then 40, then by the weekend over 100. By the next week, over 500 freedom seekers have come to the fort asking for the same thing, asking for
Freedom.
freedom and protection. Tens of thousands of freedom seekers would come to Fort Monroe over the course of the war and find protection and ultimately freedom with the changing of the law and the ending of slavery for good with the 13th Amendment. And it becomes policy of the United States and the Army that any time a freedom seeker would come to them, they would be given the same protection and freedom. So thousands upon thousands, perhaps an unknown number, would find protection and freedom with the United States Army anywhere it goes. So that decision made right here in Benjamin Butler's office on Fort Monroe in 1861 becomes the very beginning of what would be the beginning of the end of slavery, which has its beginnings, as you recall, with the arrival of the very first Africans to stay forever in the English colony that would become the beginning of what would become slavery. So you have the beginning of the beginning and the beginning of the end, all in the same spot, right here on Old Point Comfort. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? To think, all in the same spot. You know, that Shakespeare guy couldn't have done it. You know? All right, that might have been 7th grade stuff. I apologize. But you guys have been an awesome audience, okay? I really appreciate you guys coming here today, and hopefully you'll continue to learn more about Fort Monroe. This is kind of like an iceberg, if you will, and that most of the story is below the surface of the water. We're only able to really talk about the tip of the story here today. But keep coming back. We do programs all the time. In fact, May 5th, we'll have a living history tour. We're going to be talking about this story, and we're going to recreate this interview. And we would love to have you join us. May 5th. Bring your family. Come on out. All right? So we guys are going to get you guys going towards your next station. So if you want to stand all on up.